Hello everyone. We're having a look at History Chapter 2, that is the Russian Revolution. In the last class, so far we've already covered the 1904 unrest and the 1905 protest, which is known as the Bloody Sunday. We've also seen the starting of the First World War, Russia's involvement, which was very or extremely disastrous for Russia on the Eastern Front. We then saw the revolution in Petrograd in February 1917, which led to the abolition of monarchy. After Bloody Sunday, the Tsar had formed a Duma or a parliament. After February 1917, the Duma is suspended, the monarchy is abolished, and the Petrograd Soviet is formed, which goes on to make a provisional government. Now, in April 1917, this is what we saw in the last class, that Lenin returns to Russia. Vladimir Lenin, when he returns to Russia, he promotes his socialist ideologies. He makes 3 promises to people embodied in the April thesis, where he says that he will nationalize the banks, land will be distributed to the peasants, and Russia's involvement in the war will end. The provisional government sees him as a threat because Lenin is very popular amongst the people, so much so that even though he still wasn't in power, the peasants were so encouraged by his talks that they started snatching away the land from the elite. Apart from this, we also had a look at how the provisional government tried to take measures to control Lenin. Of course, they failed. Vladimir Lenin was a socialist, yes, but we know that even the socialists in Russia were divided amongst themselves. There were certain internal differences in ideology, in the sense that although they were both against private property, and the basic ideology regarding socialism was the same. The Mensheviks were the more tolerant group and they were more open to negotiations. However, the other group called the Bolsheviks were orthodox, they were radical, they were very hard bent, and they were the no-nonsense faction. So the Bolsheviks were led by Vladimir Lenin. He will go on to rename the Bolsheviks as the Communist Party, and they will take power in Russia. So today we're going to have a look at the Bolshevik uprising of October 1917. The Revolution of October 1917. The conflict between the provisional government and the Bolsheviks grew. On 16th October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. So basically we've seen that the conflict between the provisional government, which was set up by the Petrograd Soviet, and the Bolsheviks started growing, and the Bolsheviks tried to persuade the Petrograd Soviet that allow us to take power smoothly, allow a smooth transfer of power. To organize the seizure, a military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviets under Leon Trotsky. Revolutionary Committee ordered its supporters to seize government offices and arrest ministers. By nightfall, the city was under the committee's control and the ministers had surrendered. At a meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviets in Petrograd, the majority approved the Bolshevik action. Now, they did not, when the Bolsheviks were taking power from the Petrograd Soviet, they did not want to create a lot of violence, they did not want a lot of bloodshed, and so they spoke to the provisional government and said that, listen, allow us to seize power and finally a military revolutionary committee was set up under Leon Trotsky, and that committee saw that the transfer of power happened. However, there was some military action taken, definitely. The Winter Palace, where the Tsar lived, there was shelling of the Winter Palace by the ship Aurora. Now, what changed after October? We know that Lenin has come to power. We know about his April thesis. Transfer of power has happened from Petrograd Soviet to the Bolsheviks. So what changed after October 1917, after Lenin and the Bolsheviks came to power? Did he fulfill those promises he had made or not? Industry and banks were nationalized in November 1917, which meant that the government took over ownership and management. This was one of the promises of April thesis, and that was fulfilled. So banks were nationalized, which means they came under the control of the government. Land was declared as social property, and peasants were allowed to seize the land of the nobility. This is the second promise. Land was declared as a property, as a social property, which means everyone and anyone could own it and they had to share it. Thus, the peasants took the land from the nobility. The Bolshevik Party was renamed as the Russian Communist Party. Elections were conducted in November 1917 to the Constituent Assembly, but they failed. In January 1918, the assembly rejected Bolshevik measures and Lenin dismissed the assembly. So basically what happened, once transfer of power had happened, they still had to prove their presence in the assembly, in that parliament. So although Lenin did a few changes, the parliament, in which there were other people of other ideologies, they did not agree with him and they refused to support him. Well, Lenin couldn't care less and he dismissed the assembly. Despite opposition, in March 1918, the Bolsheviks made peace with Germany at Brest-Litovsk. This was the third promise. Lenin had also promised in his April thesis that he will end the war for Russia. Of course, he couldn't end the whole world war, but he said that Russia will stop fighting on the Eastern Front. And he did that. He broke his promise to the Allies and he went on and signed a peace treaty with Germany at Brest-Litovsk. The Bolsheviks participated in the elections to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which became the parliament of the country. Russia became a one-party state. Now, a new parliament is formed. So right in the beginning, we see how a Duma is formed, then how the Petrograd Soviet is formed, and now finally, the All-Russian Congress of Soviets is the name of the parliament. After October 1917, we see that there were a lot of experiments in art and architecture. However, many became disillusioned because of the censorship the party encouraged. So, the Bolsheviks have taken full control. They promoted art, architecture. However, a lot of people realized that the Bolsheviks may have made very high and mighty promises. In the beginning, socialism may have looked very nice. However, the way it was implemented with a very harsh, stern, authoritarian hand, in fact, so it became obvious slowly to people that this was dictatorship and this was an all-party rule in Russia. And they started becoming disillusioned with the Bolsheviks. Thank you.